After what you've done for me, I suppose it's only fair. I was brought to Darklight Tower before I was even born. My mother wasn't always the hag that you saw. Many years ago, she was the fairest maiden in the rift, drawing pursuers aplenty from afar. She turned all suitors away except for my father. It wasn't long before I was conceived. But one pursuer, the Thane of Greenwall, was humiliated by her rejection. In his twisted desire, he murdered my father, the man my mother loved. Grief-stricken and enraged, my mother turned to the hags of Darklight Tower, hoping to gain the power necessary to avenge my father. Like the Jarl, the Thane was the Jarl's own cousin. They made her an offer that the Thane's family would be struck by misfortune and tragedies. If my mother would pledge undying loyalty to the hags and sacrifice that which she held dearest to the Daedra. Are you jesting? He was already dead. That was the reason she approached the hags in the first place. She never cared much for wealth, or she would have been seduced by the Thane's offer long ago. Indeed, the hags demanded that her unborn daughter be cursed with a life of misery and brutality, so that the Daedra may be amused. But contrary to what you might think, she refused the hags' demand, for I was all she had left of my father. So the hags made a different offer. They would transfer that fate to another girl, to be born the same day as I. With that, she shall bear the curse. The Daedra would be sated with that child's misery, and the burden of her fear, her hatred, would forever be imprinted on my soul. The hags began a harrowing ritual, invoking an unholy power. As their chants turned silent, so too was I born, baptized in a pool of goat blood. In the next few years, the Thane's sons would die in a series of tragic accidents. Unable to bear the pain, the Thane's wife jumped into a well. The Thane held on for another few painful, wretched years until he drank himself to death. By then, Greenwall had fallen into disarray. An absolute vengeance inflicted by the hags and my mother. As was my father. What happened to the Thane's sons and wife was tragic, perhaps even unnecessary, but it wasn't at all beyond comprehension. Yes, when the hags forced my mother to make a sacrifice for her revenge. She was born the same day as I. A most unfortunate timing for her. The Hagravens told me that a group of bandits razed her farm and took her as a trophy. They did unspeakable things to the girl. That fate would have been mine. But because of my mother's love, her selfish love, it became that girl's fate instead. After what you've done for me, I suppose it's only fair. The years I spent within the confines of Darklight Tower were marked by constant abuse and isolation. As a child, my mother shielded me from the worst of the hag's machinations, but the promises of the Daedra would pull her ever further. When my mother was away, the hags would make frequent sport of the only toy they have, working all kinds of dreadful magic on me. And all she cared was her ascension. Whoever my mother was when she first came to the tower was long gone by then. Sometimes I thought it was the gods' way of punishing me for existing. Maybe they thought my mother was supposed to sacrifice me to the Daedra, not the other baby. I grew out of that sentiment eventually, but at times I still feel the ache in my soul. The Hagravens eventually discovered my aptitude for magic. They figured I was, as they called, a fine clay to be molded. So they forced me to become their apprentice, and I began learning all sorts of foul arts from them, whether I liked it or not. You'd think, My abusers simply changed from their hag servants to the hag-ravens themselves, while my mother was all too busy trying to rise to their ranks. Dark rituals best forgotten by this world. For better or for worse, I never had to hurt an innocent person in these rituals, because the hag-ravens savored this depraved act themselves. No, and if there's a way for me to forget them, I'd do it in an instant. After what you've done for me, I suppose it's only fair. They wanted me to find them a human sacrifice, so that my mother could hasten her ascension. It was then I finally realized they'd been using human sacrifices all this time. I did, although at the time I didn't realize how wrong they were. I partook in many of the hag's rituals, most of which I didn't even know the purpose. Only days before we met did I see what I've helped them do, how we've rendered lands barren, conjured monsters upon our world. Many parts in the tower were forbidden to me, and the hag's vilest rituals were concealed from my eyes. Perhaps when they told me to find a human sacrifice, they figured I was finally corrupt enough to be trusted with their dark secrets. Just that they were wrong about me. Of course. After what you've done for me, I suppose it's only fair. I did on some occasions. Usually when the hags were too busy preparing for rituals and had no time for me. But having been raised among hags and all sorts of nasty critters, the world outside was simply so strange to me. Sooner or later, I would return to the tower because it was familiar to me, however horrid it was. Like the many strange customs you civilized people have. Why would you shake hands with a stranger, even when they might have wiped their backside moments ago? Why do people make small talks? Why would anyone talk about the weather when they could simply look at the sky? There are so many weird things you do with your hands, your eyes, and your mouths. Indeed. And despite how liberating it was, the real world will take a long getting used to. I guess I have to. Better to shake a stained hand than to sacrifice another goat to a Daedra, I'd imagine.